Good morning. Welcome to Agile Surgery. Today we've got a team of people taking you through. There will be a Q&A session at the end. Please pop your questions into the Q&A box and we'll go through those at the end. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Head of Delivery in Sheffield, Mike Sanderson.
Thank you, Chloe. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this, our fourth event of a great Sheffield Delivery Festival so far this week. Welcome to those of you who are joining us for the first time to one of our events, and welcome back to those of you who have been to one of our events so far. Today we're going to be looking at a situation which lots of companies find themselves trying to deal with, applying Agile concepts and Agile delivery to legacy systems. We've got a great team ready to talk this through today, so I would like to introduce them. I'm going to go around my board. Craig.
Morning, guys. My name is Craig Howarth. I'm the capability lead for Agile at BGSS Leeds, and I've been here for a shade over 6 years now.
Marzena.
Hi, my name is Marzena Gucka. I'm business analyst and delivery manager at Sheffield BGSS, and I've been with the company for 9 months now.
John.
Hello. Thanks for joining. My name is John Mandeville. I'm one of the delivery management team at BGSS. I've been with the group about a year now, and prior to that worked with BGSS for another couple of years. So yeah, probably about 3 years overall, actually.
Last but by no means least, Gabriella.
Hi to everyone. My name is Gabriella. I'm an IT project manager at BGSS, and I've been with the team for over 1 year now. Thank you. Cool.
So before we delve into things, I just want to introduce BGSS a little bit for those of you who don't know us particularly well. Hello, Luke. Familiar face or name. Right, so for those of you who don't know us, BGSS, we are started off life 27 years ago as what can be described as essentially a software engineering company, focused very much on financial services and high quality software engineering. Fast forward to 2020, we are now what you would describe as a innovative technology consultancy. So we deliver solutions for clients across all domains, from be that public, be that private. We deliver right from the kind of early stage of design all the way through delivery and into managed service. So we do that real end-to-end offering. We are at heart an Agile delivery company, and that's kind of the reason that we kind of like to do these sessions. It's really a topic that's close to our hearts, and it's something we think is worth talking about, and it's something we feel like we're well placed to talk about given the amount of work and experience we have and we bring to the table. We move on. So BGSS was born in Leeds. We've been in Sheffield now officially for the past year or so. You'll see on here there are 13 offices. We've actually just recently added our 14th one in Melbourne in Australia. So we're not the small company we were a long time ago. We're certainly growing, and it's an exciting time to be at BGSS. There's lots going on, lots of opportunities, lots of clients who are looking for the things we do, which is great, and lots of people who are looking at what we do and being able to bring BGSS to the table. So that's all fantastic for us. As was mentioned at the start, we'd like to make this as interactive as possible. So please use the chat, use the Q&A. Gabriella will bring it together at the end. But if there's anything that jumps out as we're talking, please shout, and we will do our best to answer as we can. And on that note, I'm going to pass over to Craig. Thank you.
Oops, morning guys, if I can unmute. Cheers then, Mike. Okay, so I'm going to start this morning just looking at our agenda. First of all, I just want to introduce a few of the key challenges that we face when working with legacy systems. Then we'll look at how we might approach tackling them while keeping Agile and agility at the front of our minds. I'll then hand you over to some of my colleagues for the lion's share of the presentation. We'll talk about their real world experiences and how they're able to use Agile principles to succeed in those difficult legacy environments that we're all aware of. And then, as Chloe mentioned, we'll finally hand over to Gabriella, who's currently compiling your questions, or will be shortly, and we'll see if we can't respond to as many as possible before we run out of time. Okay, so Why change? What causes you to want to change a legacy solution? We've collated some of the more frequently found triggers that drive a need for legacy change on this slide, along with the obligatory relevant Dilbert. I'm sure you'll recognize a bunch of them from your own experiences. In fact, some of you are probably here because you're dealing with them right now, actually. Each of these trigger points and each combination of them present their own specific problem, each of which has a whole variety of potential solutions. We're going to talk about some of those today and demonstrate that it's absolutely possible to address them with an agile approach, something that many people don't instantly associate, or in fact, it's not uncommon to instantly disassociate with the word legacy. Okay, so using an agile toolkit, we've considered what might lead us to want to change a legacy system and suggested it can be done with agility in mind, but that obviously begs the question, how do we do it? The answer is, as this slide might have already suggested to you, there is no one answer. In fact, the number of answers are so many and so varied that we'll need to use every tool in our agile toolbox, modeled here by the lovely fella in the red cap, to reach the one that's right for us. There are a few key takeaways from this slide. On the left, we have a few traditional disciplines, each one of which can be thrown at a problem independently, and often are, to try and solve it. In fact, in our experience, it's really common for teams to handle legacy issues really narrowly as exclusively a technology problem. In rare circumstances, this can work out. We'll increase our chances of success, though, and reduce our risk profile by combining the tools given to us by all three disciplines into our Agile toolkit. There are a bunch of names surrounding our toolbox here, but there are only a few of very many in totality, those that will continue as themes through our upcoming case studies. For example, we've got transparency. This will, among other things, help ensure a potentially skeptical, entrenched team stay on board by knowing what we're doing and why at every turn. Or strong architecture. That'll often go without saying as a key tool when we're modifying or rewriting arcane technologies in the world of legacy, of course. But remember, there's no one-size-fits-all approach to implementing legacy change in any world. But if we consider the key tenets of Agile when we're drawing up and incrementally adapting our approach, it'll really help us arrive at the one that's right for us. That's what these little guys on the right represent. With the right principles in place, we can focus on a vision and strategy as we modernize the tech, all while giving our people a good working environment where their voice is important. The case studies the guys will soon walk you through will demonstrate how that's worked for us in practice. So just to summarize my introduction then, and hopefully this should be pretty evident at this point, there is no single right approach to legacy change. We'll need to consider things like organizational drivers, our people, the shape of our organization or our client's organization and its existing culture, and obviously more besides. This is, of course, always the case when spinning up a new delivery project, but it's worthy of extra emphasis in the world of legacy. We're going to look at two case studies now, where we talk about very different ways in which we've attacked very different legacy change problems. First, a project where we carved off functionality bit by bit, replacing outdated and brittle parts with modern and robust ones until the whole system was up to scratch. Then we'll look at a project where we built modern components in parallel to the old and prepared for a cutover. Okay, with that, I'll hand over to Marziana to kick us off.
Thanks, Craig. So I'm going to cover off example of scenario when we tackled legacy system using the approach of incremental change. I just start by saying this approach won't be right for every scenario. It very much depends on the scale of the change and the size of the chunks that problem can be broken into. It also depends on the target end state and the dependencies between the different elements of the solution. You can see on the diagram in here that shows that we started with a monolithic legacy applications and the client that was complaining of many of the pain points that Craig mentioned in the previous slide. The main ones that were a priority for us were a lack of stability and ability to scale, caused by years of tactical changes and no overall vision of strategy of the architecture. This was made worse by seasonal fluctuations in traffic, driven by seasonal demand, marketing campaigns, and more recently, COVID. Secondly, inherent complexity in terms of the code that led to slow development, big testing windows, and frequent issues in production. A lot of this could be traced back to a tactical solution, not tackled tech debt, and in testament continuously saying that continuously building in sand is not being sustainable way going forward. The best analogy I heard on this project was that when you turn on the light in the bathroom, it also rings the doorbell. So ultimately, you likely get to the point of a time when the rate slowed down and you can't really make this sustainable approach for any longer. So for this particular client that we are talking about in here, it wasn't realistic to pause any new feature development for a medium or long term. And therefore, we devised a solution that was aligned with their short-term strategy and allowed us to deliver new functionality using a microservice approach. This carved out aspects of the legacy system and allowed us to implement something to production iteratively, releasing value sooner in terms of revenue generation, but also improvement to the non-functional aspects that were proving problematic and limiting growth. There also was an element of getting slower to be able to go fast. And as part of this transition, some of the feature took longer than they would have done as part of the legacy application. But the long-term benefits outweighed the short-term gain. One of the key aspects of the change like this is being able to articulate benefits in real terms. So for example, if the feature will now take 4 sprints to deliver in a new tech instead of 2 sprints in old tech, when we're gonna see the actual return of investment. So if the next feature gonna take 2 sprints instead of 4, it pays for itself within a quarter. So that has a positive impact going forward. So after being proposed with this problem, we ran an initial discovery period focusing on key problems to fix for this particular client, which were how do we accelerate the implementation of the new technologies, allowing benefits to be released sooner without spending a fortune stabilizing the legacy system, which ultimately is going to be thrown away in the near future. Could leveraging new capability assist with tackling pain points within the current web site landscape, whilst creating an alternative approach to shift to a modern tech stack? For example, carving out some elements would relieve the stain on what was left behind. Would evolution of the current platform provide more efficient approach for incrementally delivering outcome in line with business priorities? So we used our experience and a lot of our Agile toolkit, Craig mentioned earlier, to produce a roadmap of step changes required to tackle the problem. So we made some improvements to the existing delivery approach first. It was fine, but needed a bit of tuning to gain a bit more efficiency. Like many organizations, there's often an element of we've always done it that way, and sometimes it can take a bit of time to build trust. And I've generally found the best approach to do this by demonstrating improvement in reality and starting small. This then proves the process and the approach and demonstrates the value to the client. Strong architecture was required to have technical pain points and to look at how we can break up legacy into smaller manageable chunks whilst introducing new technology. We used a separation of services approach. The system initially had a lot of internal dependencies and different elements that were called in logical way and made the changes slow and risky. We looked to leverage benefits of previous investment in front-end technologies investigations by moving to modern UI language where libraries and frameworks already existed. It's also important to consider a skill set of the existing team to ensure that we can hit the ground running. Using standardized pipelines and a CI/CD model to support blue-green deployment enables daytime deployment and frequent releases. A/B testing was also quite important for this organization, but it has historically been done in quite cumbersome way using heavyweight fronts and JavaScript. So we support novel canary deployments with multiple app versions running side by side that enable that to stabilize a bit more. We've also considered business priorities to decide what best to deliver to avoid duplication of cost, for example, making sure we didn't have to build things twice. But that said, there were some examples when we had to make a priority change just to ensure that the new feature can be released. So we had to make a decision to make a change to the legacy platform and also factor that in a roadmap for the new tech. but those decisions had to be taken quite considerately, just ensuring that we don't slow ourselves further. As with any change, setting off in the right direction is a key, and you just need to make sure you give yourself time to do it. Don't start writing code until you're ready. By this, I mean just go through all the activities of the sprint zero in terms of knowing what the path to look like is gonna look like. Making sure that all the environments are set up. You've got the right NFRs defined and understood, how the new tech stack will support alongside element of the old. Delivery then took a form of the standard sprint model with the usual sprint planning, daily stand-ups, show and tells, and retrospective. Once we kicked off, we wanted to ensure that we aren't blind to continuous improvement, just to ensure that we continuously improve as we go through the transition. So we focus on people and empowerment and get them. We kept including listening elements in the process to help continually improve it. We also adopt an approach to allows us to tackle a tech debt in each sprint. We did it with 80-20 rule. It didn't have to be utilized that way, but it allowed us to ring-fence some resources to focus on high priority items and avoid some of the problems that were encountered in the old stack. We initially prioritized from a tech point, given that was the key driver, but it was balanced with the business priorities. So you need to expect fluctuations in your plan and see that as opportunity to continually ensure that you're on the best track. Using this model is also important to consider service transition as part of each sprint, because you will likely create a more complex landscape, initially at least, by introducing new technology and systems alongside with the elements of the business change. So planning in the commissioning activities is also a key. It's not enough to stop using elements of the old system. You need to make sure that you tie them up as you go along to release the benefits of simpler support and development. Hopefully that goes some way to describing you how you can break the legacy system in a logical way while iteratively delivering the value and the change, and end up with a set of best of breed solutions. So I'm now going to hand over to John, who's going to talk about different approach, more big bang approach. Over to you, John.
Cool. Thank you, Mazena. Yeah, and I guess I'm going to kind of reiterate some of those messages and some of those kind of key themes that you've heard about the toolkit. But the thing I want to share is that, and again, demonstrate, is that toolkit does have differences, and it does depend where you're using it and the context in which you're using it as to how some of these elements that you'll come across are going to look. And it's really true as well that a lot of the things that we'll talk about are common across any delivery and any engagement, whether it's legacy or greenfield. And to the question of, are they unique to legacy? Well, no, they're not. They're common tools, but used in a particular fashion. And so an example of that might be with some of these things that I'm going to talk about, just lending a bit more effort and energy towards training and becoming familiar with things, and perhaps using discoveries, and also perhaps selling the benefits of some of these tools that you might pick and start to use, versus them being kind of more intrinsically, I guess, part of a greenfield delivery. So in the example I'm going to share, I'm not going to go into any details naturally, but just suffice to say, we're talking about an online banking platform here where we had a mobile and a web interface for the solution. And the slide we've put up here really is just some of those elements or some of those tools that we touched on, and really just want to draw out from the slide that we've colored them slightly differently. So the pink ones are those sort of foundational concepts that probably don't vary that much. They're kind of really central to a lot of agile delivery and a lot of transformation that you might do. Whereas the blue/green ones are certainly really, really foundational principles and tools that we would look for and that we found in this example, but they probably have quite different shapes. Again, in our example, I'll kind of elaborate on that a little bit more. So the first one I'll just pick up, and this is probably one of the most important things that we found in this example, was that concept of strong and clear product ownership. For us, in our example, legacy implied kind of product created over years with multiple tech stacks, and kind of the why for things was often a little bit lost or hard to locate, back to Mazena's point about kind of tacking things on over time. And having that really strong person and that strong role to help decide on the what is it we should change, and what would add value if we were to change it, was really, really crucial for us. So that's one that we would certainly recommend gets a good deal of focus. And just as importantly, what could be left alone, that was part of that product ownership role for us. And understanding what pieces in that journey from sort of legacy to a more modernized estate would unlock other pieces. For us, the role was really, really important in terms of that legacy transformation. And what it created for us was an ability to focus on, we called it kind of a single steel thread of features in the product that didn't just prove out the technology, but proved out the way in which we could deliver for a set of customer journeys initially. And yeah, we probably did arrive in a similar place. Excuse me, I'm just going to cut off some light. Arrive in a similar place to your classic MVP, but we probably approached it from a subtly different angle, in so much as we were looking to prune things away and leave alone for now, versus thinking about what those core user journeys needed to be. So the second element, again in pink, because it's absolutely foundational, it's been talked about before, is we needed to focus on strong underpinning architecture. And again, it lends back to that comment about legacies very often quite monolithic, it's quite complex, a lot of complexity built into each component. And in our particular case, these systems were embedded with other systems, and the dependencies were not very transparent or easy to understand. So the value we were trying to unlock by focusing on this area with a client was, instead of having a high investment cost in the whole thing, if you wanted to make a change, we wanted to make it cheaper to change. That was the key challenge that we were faced into. How we did that, and this isn't something that is always the case, but again, you've heard it before, but microservices for us was an example that helped us. There are many other ways to do this, doesn't always have to be microservices, but for us that really worked, because what it allowed us to do was to be really granular and be very sort of agile and about what could change and when it changed, and really just helped us understand dependencies and get those dependencies in a more transparent state, so we could unlock smaller pieces more readily. Just moving on to the third of the sort of the ready pinky colours, automation was absolutely crucial for us in this instance, purely because it really hadn't been part of kind of the engineering practice or the test practice prior to this attempt to kind of shift things forwards. So recognizing that, negotiating the value of automation in terms of testing, improving quality automatically, was really an important facet of what we did. And it is linked to architectural refactoring, combining with microservices. What we were looking for was an ability to unlock that chance to hotfix, going back to those original kind of pain points that people often encounter. But absolutely crucial was sort of building assurance into our development practice, managing risk up front, so that when we make a change, we could be more confident that errors and such were trapped reliably earlier with little extra effort. But it is worth pointing out, and I think we've alluded to this before, some of these things, they take a little while to mature. So the first iterations for us in our example weren't always quick, but our mantra was kind of slow down to speed up a little bit to get these good disciplines and practices in place. So I guess moving into areas on the blues where there's probably a lot more variability in how you might experience them and how we did in this particular instance, but kind of synchronization. And it's not a technical challenge as such, and it goes back to that kind of concept that we're talking about a blended toolkit here. It's not just technical changes that need to make, technical changes we need to face into. We needed to look at the people that support the change. And I guess the reason for that is that shifting legacy tech can be quite hairy if the people aren't considered and consulted and involved, because there's obviously a lot of experience and domain knowledge to call upon there. So our goal in this example was really just to make sure we could increase transparency through the sort of practices, the processes, the behaviours, and really just support people working together. And again, in this example, there were quite a number of teams, there were many teams, and we got involved with the client and their existing teams in using SAFe. Again, in the same way as microservices, there are other practices and frameworks out there. This isn't the only one, but this particular one suited the client, suited the teams. We knew how it worked, so we're all happy to kind of get together and try and use this framework. But the underpinning ethos was the important thing. We wanted to use something. So through daily scrums, through scrum of scrums, regular demonstration, continual feedback with the POs and their BA support team. We wanted to encourage an environment, I guess, where we could fail faster, fail together, and therefore fix faster and therefore fix more cheaply. That was kind of the goal, but equally to achieve successes at the same pace. So it's a shared concern going forwards versus that perhaps more sequential approach to change where you only really find out the problems towards the back end of some testing, which means you have to go back to the start of your development life cycle. And that just means cost for clients, and that can be quite troublesome and damaging. So the last two, I'm just going to kind of merge together a little bit, again, because they do complement each other. They are disciplines and practices that we would see very routinely throughout lots of our engagements, but they do have very different shapes. And just focusing back on the purpose, these tools, incremental delivery and continual integration and continual delivery, really just trying to help us be able to respond to the markets more quickly. That's the goal behind it. So the incremental delivery piece, the framework you choose. In our example, we put in place sprints. We focused on the roles. So we had product ownership and the development team working together to really unlock the ability to deliver small chunks together and reinforce that sort of discipline of inspecting often. And in this example, we didn't actually deliver directly into live. It meant what we did was we delivered into a state that was almost pre-prod-like, but we could inspect, or the product ownership could inspect the increments alongside what was currently there and understand what they were getting out of that investment. And I'll come on to that a little bit in a moment on one of the latter slides. So the other bit, an engineering practice, CI/CD, was the goal again there was to deliver small and often into those build pipelines with the automated tests, with various gates and checks, some of which were automated, some of which were human. But just really trying to focus on checking quality and producing something that could be inspected regularly. But we were just really trying to manage the risk of change carefully by not making too many big changes that were difficult to roll back, and kind of make sure that it was easy to kind of move forward in smaller pieces. And everything else that you see on that picture kind of ultimately feeds towards this goal of those small increments that we can inspect alongside the production instance at the same time. And so again, just to reference that point with this example, it wasn't your typical release into live, but for us, it was about finding the right balance with the client and knocking down some of their most difficult challenges first, and perhaps not trying to take on all of the difficult challenges right away. And that sort of circles back to that point about finding your delivery approach, for your organization that suits where you are. Our perspective on this is that not all of those challenges should be handled at once. In fact, in this example, it probably would have been more disruptive to focus on trying to release into live because of the patterns and practices of the sort of the teams in that environment. We were looking at a highly complex multi-speed IT organization, and we just felt it would have caused more problems, but that's not to say that wasn't a challenge we didn't have in our backlog to be addressed. So, but we along with the client, focused on getting those thinner slices, more ownership, higher mobility, and greater transparency as our initial priorities. And then the goal was to move on towards the sort of the latter end about how do we get this into production so that transparency loop was completely closed. And yeah, so again, to push back to that point, we shaped the toolkit for those initial set of priorities versus just applying the whole set briefly, which we felt would have caused more problems. And for us, again, it's about giving that confidence that there isn't only one way, and you shouldn't lose sight of the things you might want to do in the future, but equally, it's only realistic and sensible to focus on those kind of initial priorities first, which is what we did. So I guess from our example, that's all I wanted to share. I think I'm handing back to Craig and Gabriella for a little bit of a wrap up before we sort of take Q&A on some of the things that we've covered.
That's right. Thanks, John. Okay, hi again. Hopefully you've just taken something away from today's session already, but I just want to summarize what's been covered. It applies to, excuse me, it applies to pretty much every delivery, but especially so in the world of legacy. A strong toolkit is something you can and should reach into regardless of the challenge. The combination of, and indeed the use of each of the tools will be specific to your delivery though. As a colleague of mine is wont to say, a hammer is a hammer. You can use it to hit nails, or you can use it to damage kneecaps. The choice is yours. It's also tempting to try and boil the ocean and roll a complete top to bottom agile overhaul into your legacy world. It's almost always better, though, to start with the fundamentals and continuously refer back to them when considering how to attack your issues. Clarity of focus is key, and in our experience has increased our chances of success across a number of engagements. That also means picking your battles. There'll be quick wins in cases where the cost benefit of making changes is overwhelmingly beneficial, but there'll also be areas and circumstances where it's not worth yet deviating from the legacy norm. Unless they hinder progress to a really unreasonable extent, there are some areas better challenged when the core delivery is in a really strong place. And then finally, it's a core tenet of Agile and one that we should all live by already. But again, it's worth remembering that just because this is a legacy overhaul doesn't mean we shouldn't continue to inspect and adapt. If something isn't working for whatever reason, the whole team should always feel empowered to suggest positive change. And that extends to both our old and our new worlds. Okay, thanks again. And with that, I'm going to hand back over to Gabriella, who's going to walk us through your questions and answers.
Right, thank you, Craig. So we had some questions submitted already. So first question, where did your product ownership come from, BJSS or client? And I think both Marzena and John alluded to strong product ownership. So back to Marzena, would you like to start?
Yeah, I can take this one on. So in the example that I was talking about, the product ownership came from the client. I think this is usually what is happening. When we're dealing with the legacy system, we kind of rely on the knowledge of the client, that they know the system, they know what they want them to do, but not necessarily know how to implement that. And I think in that case, we just offer our experience and expertise to guide them through the right process. In the example I talked about as well, we kind of offered again, like a guidance and suggestions what needs to be prioritized for us to have a great rate of success, and that worked pretty well.
Cool. All right, moving on to the next one. What was the time scale of the project? Marzena, come on, you started then.
Again, I think with the legacy systems, it varied massively. So it really depends on what change you need to tackle. If you need to totally rebuild a legacy system and create a new one, we are talking about like months and sometimes years. And if only you're changing a small bits and pieces, then probably a couple of months is what you're looking for. But I think it's just what we are trying to focus at BGSS is how we can deliver value to the clients quickly. So even though we've got quite long timescales project, how we can ensure that the value is released relatively quickly, so the clients don't have to wait ages before they see some improvements.
Cool. Anything else from anyone? No. Okay. So what did you do about new feature requests while migrating, and who held the line on the hard decisions? Marzena?
Yeah, I can take this one as well, because I think with the new features, when you're moving through the legacy system, it's always the question, shall we start building a new feature on the new stack or the old stack? And I think it's just ensuring that we've got the buy-in from the business, that they understand what we are doing and why we're doing it. So it's ensure that they are focused on the end goal, that, yeah, we are moving away from the legacy system because that was causing us problems. So each decision about new feature needs to be kind of considered consciously, just to ensure that we are not slowing ourselves down. But I think the reality is as well that sometimes the things can't be avoided. So it's just taking each new feature request into the loop and ensuring that this is exactly what we need and understand the impact on the long term.
I guess I'd probably just chip in on that one as well, in so much as you know, what was done. It was slightly different for our example, but that the key role for us was the product ownership in the one that sort of I was talking about, and that's where all those decisions kind of filtered through. And we had a slightly luxurious position, I guess, that there wasn't an awful lot of shifting sand for our legacy solution. It was more about let's kind of try and replace like for like, but make it more you know, modular and easy to adapt. But that product owner role was super key for us, and I guess for me that would be where I'd answer that question.
Cool. On to the next one. So how did the project manage risk? Was there an initial risk assessment?
I mean, I started talking, I may as well carry on that one. So the sort of the classical mindset of, you know, big upfront risk planning is still absolutely valid to think about risk as you're approaching a piece of work. And we did in our example. SAFE has kind of a lot of the more traditional project management disciplines around risk management built into it, and risk reviews, you should be doing that. But we tried to very much take a mindset that was, let's look at what we're going to deliver first. Let's look at what risk is incumbent in that first iteration, let's say, and understand how we can deal with that early. So kind of not only doing the big upfront risk planning, but also doing risk planning and thinking about risk as you go. And so for each iteration we did, which was roughly in the region of, I think if from memory it was about 5 sprints, we'll be thinking about what those problem areas were likely to be and trying to front load the increments, front load the work to just knock down those risks as early as we could. And that scales right back to, you know, your Scrum, where you talk about 2 weeks. It's about thinking, what is it that's most likely to cause us some problems? Let's go and inspect that, do some spike work, etc. As soon as you can. So perhaps for us it was a bit of a hybrid approach.
Cool, thank you. How do you sell this to clients who do not want to invest in a new way of working? They just want to update their tech stack. John?
Yeah, and again, you know, anyone else from the group, feel free to sort of chip in on this one. But in terms of, you know, how do we communicate this with clients? We're very much about what problems are we trying to solve here, and doing those in the most kind of cost-effective and efficient way to kind of get the right value out as early as we could. And it kind of chimes back to a lot of those. I don't know if you can recall on the earlier slides, those speech bubbles about, you know, we can't release very quickly, we can't get value to market very quickly, let's say our support is taking too long. So for us, it's not just kind of selling it as these are all the things you should do. It's kind of listening and a conversation about what are the problems that are most important to you, and let's talk about how we can address those problems using some of these toolkits. And therefore it's not really a sales pitch as such. It's more of a, well, this is common sense now, let's try and do this and let's experiment and see if it really does help you.
Yeah, it's about benefits. It's about achieving, you know, the solutions to the problems that John's talked about, but about showing how those are beneficial to the company and to the wider tech delivery of whatever they're trying to achieve. Just kind of saying, well, it's all right. We've managed to achieve a solution to one of the problems is all well and good, but what does it bring? What does it bring to the table, and how is that better all around? And if you sort of add those things up, you know, you sold 5 out of your 10. Okay, you're in a better place than where you were. Yeah, you probably are. Okay, so it gives you kind of that continued impetus to continue going forward and use what's now available and be able to sort of work in a different way and achieve differently from where you were before you started.
Yeah, great.
I think the last question is a bit similar to the one previous. So how do you respond to someone who says, we've always done it this way?
Take this one maybe firstly. I think it's just really common, especially when you talk about legacy system, that is a natural reaction to change. But I think it's again kind of coming back to what we already said is, yeah, you've already done it this way, but that created a problem. So that's why we are here, and we just want to look how we can tackle that problem to ensure that we succeed. You know, John, would you like to add anything to it?
Yeah, I mean, it depends at what level we're looking at this. I mean, when you talk about human level, people in teams, it's understanding, you know, do we as team members want to continue to work with these particular patterns and practices and in these particular ways, because that's fine. For some people, it really does work to carry on and work in that way, and that might be the case. And then you go to the next layer of perhaps an onion and you look at, okay, and is that giving us the value in the right way? And you might sort of step outwards from that team perspective, but you might find that actually when you're talking to the teams, yes, some might say, look, I'm really happy where I am, but there might be some problems that this can really address and help. So I guess, again, it goes back to that conversation, finding out whether there are problems that should be addressed and having that kind of open, transparent discussion about the best way to do it, and just helping, I guess, share understanding, you know, for why we might do something and not just doing it to people.
I think there's an element of this which is about sort of senior stakeholder buy-in as well. So, you know, we focus very much on the the teams and deliveries and all those sorts of things. But there's an element here of direction of travel for a client, and having that sort of senior stakeholder buy-in to enable that change. It's relatively straightforward for someone who's been doing something for the same way for X amount of years to say, well, this is how we've done it, this is how it's always worked. But you need those different perspectives on why that's maybe not appropriate for going forward, and it can't just come from one place. And you sometimes need that support and that senior buy-in. You can't just have a conversation with the team, because it's you're only tackling kind of part of the problem there. You've got to go wider and ensure that there's a wider buy-in to what you're trying to achieve.
We can't forget as well that one of the key tenets of Agile is to embrace change. And given that's at the absolute heart of everything that we do, it shouldn't be a particularly difficult sell, given all the benefits into one of our partners or one of our clients.
That was all in terms of questions. So thank you guys for responding. Just to summarize and remind everyone that today's session has been recorded and the details will be sent out after the session. Also, if you would like to see other similar events, please look at the BGSS Sheffield page for other exciting events. Lastly, just thank everyone that put all the effort in presenting today, and for those of you who joined us, please stay safe and take care. Bye bye, guys. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.